Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Speaking of some of the fallout from war, you had mentioned to me about the incident in Khost. Which again, I don't know if you're allowed to say the name of the place or not, but I've been there before. FOB Chapman in Khost province, Afghanistan, and you mentioned that you feel some sort of responsibility for what had happened. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how that went down, what that incident was, and your involvement or visibility.
Some of it. I mean, I can say some of it. So first and foremost, just as your listeners, will some of them will kind of know the story well. So everything I talk about now has actually been cleared for release. I mean, Leon Panetta wrote a book, and he had a solid chapter on this. So when I talk about it, I take a lot of it in public. I take a lot of it from that, but so the 50,000 foot, the kind of the bottom line up front is, we were beat by Al Qaeda. We had what we thought was a really promising penetration with a sister Arab intelligence service, and he ended up being bad. And the end result, I was intimately involved in helping. In the beginnings, in running the case, I wasn't on the ground in Khost, but I sent one of my officers there who was killed. I was, the planning, everything involved in it, and ultimately, 7 of my colleagues were killed, and that was, to me, it was personally devastating. That was by far the worst kind of day of my life, period. And it certainly, taught me a lot about humility. And I think I always talked about, war zone service is really interesting because you come back and you walk a little taller because you did something important. But it's also really important to have a sense of humility and never believing your own hype. And we got beat. Al Qaeda ran a double agent at us. And so ultimately, we put too much trust in someone. And I remember having discussions with individuals at our headquarters. Would Al Qaeda ever be able to do this, like the Chinese, the Russians? The conventional wisdom was no. But ultimately, we trusted someone who we thought would get to the number 2 in Al Qaeda, Ayman Zawahiri. This agent candidate was a doctor, and he in essence had a very quick kind of jailhouse relationship recruitment with an Arab intel service, and we then kind of were involved in the case. And ultimately, because of all the things that he passed on, which was battle damage assessment from drone strikes, which was some personal information or clearly insinuation that he could get close to some of the senior leadership of Al Qaeda. We knew Ayman Zawahiri was sick. This guy was a doctor. We had some certainly some ideas that he might be get close to Zawahiri, but we thought we had to meet him. And so the meeting arrangements, kind of moved over time, but ultimately it was going to be in Khost, Afghanistan, which, is, it's FOB Chapman. It's a place, it's a stronghold of the Haqqani network, right across the border in Pakistan, Miram Shah, but it's a legendary place in CIA lore for a lot of reasons. One of our first kind of, or one of our biggest kind of counterterrorism pursuit teams located there. But ultimately, that was the meeting location. And at the end, unfortunately, and you never know what happened. And, and I take as much responsibility as anybody, but the meeting arrangements that the leadership of the base and others, that we thought were in place, they for whatever reason kind of stood down on them. And so, ultimately, this individual was a suicide bomber, and he detonated, his improvised explosive vest and killed 7 of our officers, including my friends. And so, as someone who had been intimately involved in the operation, I was on the live feed when this occurred. It was an ISR feed. All of a sudden, something goes really wrong. I remember. This is, and again, it's out in the press now. The CIA case officer was a phenomenal officer named Darren Levante, someone who I considered to be, I loved him. He was superhuman. This is someone who was an FBI agent, U.S. Marshal. He was an Army Ranger, and he was a cop. He did everything before. I would joke with him and said, "You can't hold down a job," but he was the most badass dude I've ever met in my life. did previous service in Afghanistan as well at one of our bases. And standing up, when this happened, and I remember getting, something clearly was wrong, and I finally got a phone call from our station chief in Kabul, who's one of our kind of legendary officers. And again, this taught me so much. And he said, Marc, look, you got to sit down right now. They're all gone. And you're going to have to get up in front of 400 of the people you lead in this office, everybody who knows and loves Darren. And tell him what happened. He said, look, there's going to be a time for you to grieve and figure out what happened, but you need to stand up and lead. And I remember that calling that all hands was I don't really remember even what happened. It was the hardest experience of my life, and people dropping on their knees and crying, and it was truly awful. And so I feel an enormous sense of responsibility to that. I remember when I was promoted to the senior intelligence service, sitting in the ceremony in our bubble at headquarters, thinking I don't deserve this. But it's. The only thing I'll say on this is, I have tremendous, sadness and regret. I know the Labani family very well. I still visit them in Florida. I remember years later talking to, he's our current ambassador in Saudi Arabia. He was at the time the deputy commander of CENTCOM, John Abizaid, a very well-known 3 or 4 star Army officer, Army general. And I was telling him about my feelings, what happened. He said, Marc, you're going to have to deal with this. And he said, just think about what I do. 70 of your friends were killed. He goes, I do this on an industrial scale as the deputy of CENTCOM. And so, yeah, it was a terrible moment. I learned a ton. I have an enormous sense of humility. Never believed my hype ever again after that. And I tell that story a lot just because, there's a lot of lessons learned from that. And that spurred me then to go on to Afghanistan, where I kind of had a lot of anger and we wreaked a lot of vengeance after that. I went back for a year after that, immediately when I was done with that Middle Eastern post.
So, Marc, you were watching a live feed. So this was an attempt to recruit an Al-Qaeda insider. This would have been a huge intelligence recruitment for the CIA. Right. And this attempted recruitment would have been classified as a covert operation. So you're there watching the live feed from the drone. Is what you're describing to me.
Well, it was an ISR feed where we were not going to watch the meeting. We watched the movement of the individual to the base, and so we knew it was going on. And now I'm just on a chat. I'm on a secure chat with the base, and nobody's answering me. And I'm thinking, something's not right. And there are people behind me who knew Darren well, and I look behind, I'm like, everybody out of my office, and because people started getting worried. And then it was gut wrenching. It was terrible, to the point where I remember after that it was I didn't eat or sleep for 48 hours. I ended up, and this is nothing compared to others who never came back, but I ended up getting a freaking kidney stone, and I passed out and had to be hospitalized with a kidney stone, because for 48 hours I didn't eat or drink after that, because we were so consumed with what had occurred. Yeah. So, when and you all know this, there's times in your life when something's wrong. You get that, whether it's your hair stands up or you get that sick feeling. That was a bad feeling. It's there's a lot of lessons learned that have gone into kind of the agency playbook for operations, which is really important. And so, you hope some good comes of it, but you can never bring those folks back. And so, I remember, our base chief, Jennifer Matthews, again, it's out in the press quite a bit. I remember, that day talking to her. I mean, just, really, really stuff that I'll never forget. And then, everybody, just like everybody else, I was very interested in the movie Zero Dark 30, and they have that whole scene, which was excruciating for me to watch. I don't even know if it's accurate or not, because they're all gone. But probably has some element of truth in that. So that was tough.
But Marc, why did I could never really figure out, why did Zero Dark 30 incorporate that incident in FOB Chapman? It had nothing to do with the hunt for Bin Laden, as I understand it.
I think it's the story behind the agency efforts, and so ultimately, I have some really good friends. I would go in and out of the hunt for Al Qaeda, to be honest. over that period between 9/11 and when Bin Laden was ultimately killed. But even afterwards, and after that, there are individuals I knew who were involved for 9, 10 straight years. That's all they did. They worked in our counterterrorism center. They rotated in the TDY circuit between Pakistan and Afghanistan. To me, they are total heroes in this because they have encyclopedic knowledge of the target. So I think it was the 0 Dark 30 was just a story of that commitment. And it's funny because one of my really good friends, who was he's still in, he's a station chief now, but I remember sitting with him, at the local dive bar here at the Vienna Inn. We're talking about this, and he said 9 years. It was 9 years, and a lot of colleagues, unfortunately, were killed. And by the way, this we're focused on of course what happened in Khost, but there's a lot of ground branch officers who paid the ultimate price as well. And so you can't forget that. Afghanistan is a very unforgiving place. So the agency's given a lot there.
Could you tell us then about afterwards, after that event where you were back in Langley, and now you volunteered to go to Shkin and get into the shit?
So I came back again. There's a theme here. So I came back, obviously really shaken by this, and I walked into our personnel office, and this was after I'd left that service in the Levant, another Middle Eastern country, and I said, obviously I was upset about what happened. I said, send me to the worst place on the planet, and they're like, we got it for you. And I said, where is it? And they said, it's Shkin, Afghanistan. I said, sign me up. And so Shkin was a legendary place in agency lore. Three ground branch officers have been killed there. It was the first CTPT. After 9/11 was created in Shkin. I mean, there's great pictures of these guys in sandals and FDNY and NYPD hats. There's others killed. There's Navy SEAL there killed, and then there was some terrible incidents of there was a U.S. military it was a helicopter that was shot down there. And so but it was a really interesting place. It is 10 kilometers, 6 miles. It's in Paktika province. It's right across the border from Pakistan. It's probably the farthest end of the earth you could ever imagine. And it's a place where it was not an Al Qaeda stronghold. I think it was more of Taliban. There was a group there called the Commander Nazir group that you both might be familiar with, which is in essence a Taliban group responsible for the deaths of a lot of Americans. And so it was a really unforgiving place. And it was to get there you'd have to take obviously it's it's a flight to Kabul, and then it's from Kabul you'd have to get to with this C-130 to Khost, and then from Khost you take the helo into Shkin, which runs once every 2 weeks because the weather's so crappy, which means you're stranded there all the time. You're either stranded at Khost, and I was joking with you all before and talking to others, some of the folks probably watching today. Khost base was a shithole of staggering proportions. If you and I think maybe you all have both been there. The transient TDY place where we'd sit around wait for the helo was like infested with bed bugs. It was a harsh.
It wasn't so bad by the time I got there at FOB Salerno.
Okay, because this place was gruesome. Now, but again, you were sitting around the fire pit, incredible camaraderie. But then you got to go through this mountain pass in Paktika, and you end up at Shkin, and you are the end of the earth. And that was, to me, the happiest year of my life. Number one is I was able to kind of, seek vengeance for what happened. Maybe not. Maybe our shrink should have let me out there, but they did. I had an incredible cadre of regular case officers and paramilitary officers. One of the things that I would get, like, there's no way if I had this conversation and I was going out again, they would ever let me go out again, because one of the proudest things that happened, I was back in Khost, and it actually he's the current head of our Special Activities Division now, or Special Activities Center, but he was the base chief at Khost. He looked at me and said, "Marc, you're running a freaking cult there." The people at Shkin we were so tight. And so, because when I got there, I said the following. I said, look, everybody here's mission is one thing. And they knew I came from the whole mess in Khost. I said, we're going to kill as many people as possible, lawfully. But so we're going to wreak vengeance. And there are there are things that you have to do in terms of what do you call it? Winning hearts and minds. We call it covert influence. There's a lot of nation building we had to do. I did that, but my officers knew I didn't care about that. We were on a mission there because of what had happened, and so it was a unique time where everybody was so much. I'd have the damn so again, there's so many great stories. Our cooks. We had a Macedonian cook. This guy's not cleared at all. He's probably a freaking Russian agent. When we'd have a successful operation, I'd bring him into the all hands and he'd giving him high fives too. Because by the way, agency food in the war zones is great, and so this dude deserved it too. So we had just this incredible tight knit unit, and I think the highlight was there was several ground branch officers who'd been killed there over the years. There was one high value target we were going after who we knew was directly responsible for the death of one of them. And that was my mission. I could care less about anything else. And so we recruited agents across the way in Pakistan, again, right across the border control post. I don't even remember the month it was, but we obviously put them on the X. We called in a strike and we killed this individual who was responsible for killing a lot of Americans, but directly responsible for killing a CIA officer. And that feeling, as we kind of sat down around the fire pit, I always called the fire pit, and you all know this, is caveman TV. There was nothing better than sitting around that fire pit every night. I loved that because I'm with all the officers. And I say, when I say the boys and the gals, there was we had certainly male and female officers all together, but that was the time where we spent these times together. And I remember, we kind of made it, we had a toast, and one of the ground branch guys said, you know what? Let's make a call to Fort Bragg, North Carolina right now. And we called this officer's widow. And boy, would I gotten a lot of shit for doing this. We called her and we told her, hey, we just avenged the death of your husband.
Jesus.
And so we sat back that night, and there was some tears. I must have had 500 messages from all over the world. A lot from kind of the paramilitary arm, but others from just, hey, that's what we do. And it was awesome. And I remember thinking, we can pack up and go home now, but we didn't. But those deployments, and you both know this, it's the sense of brotherhood and sisterhood that is just something you can't even imagine. And we're talking.